Hey folkies, how y'all doing? I hope you're all well. I thought I'd take a moment to record a video about the Critical Policy Analysis Essay, which is your last assignment submitted to UTAS for HSP406. Woohoo! Alright, as you can see, as per usual, I've got daggy little graphics on the first slide, which kind of walk you through what you have to do. You need to find your strategic policy, which is relevant to your work area or somewhere else within the police organisation. Then you need to do quite a bit of research, looking in the library, looking Google Scholar, that sort of stuff, and then do a bit of reading, and then bringing all these things together to type up your essay. And hopefully that'll all unfold quite nicely for you. So just a reminder that this is one of two assignments that are submitted through UTAS, and the other assessment is submitted through the residential at the Victoria Police Academy. The assignment due date is on the Milo site for you. The maximum word count is 2,000 words, and that excludes your reference list, and the task is weighted at 30%. So this is about looking at the strategic policies that police organisations use and focus on and develop and implement and all of those sorts of things. They will have lots of different things that they do. The policies are often developed out of specific set of circumstances or sometimes even a specific event. What you need to do using an essay format is to write an essay that critically analyses a strategic Victoria Police policy of your choice. You'll need to draw on current scholarly literature that discusses research about the policy issues that you focused on. This can be national or international research literature. It doesn't have to be focused specifically in Victoria. Some research of government reports and websites will be necessary. You may be lucky enough to also find evaluations and critiques of the police policies that you're focusing on, which might be useful. So this is what you need to do. Find your document, read your policy document. It might be useful to find some context. Why was it implemented? For what purpose and when? So you might be able to look at things like Hansard or news articles, all of those sorts of things. After you've done that and you've got your head around what it is and why it's there, then go to the databases in the library and find some articles on the main issues that you've identified in your policy. Then you write up your analysis as an essay, critically challenging the ideas in the policy using scholarly literature. Now, critically challenging does not necessarily mean negative, so I want to raise your attention to that. It can mean highlighting how the policy that you've chosen is actually really well supported by the evidence base, or alternatively not supported by the evidence base. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. When you're all done, upload your response as a Word document electronically to the HSP406 Milo site. So, in terms of the suggested structure, you need an introduction. It's a no-brainer. We've talked about that and done that in the first assignment. One paragraph introducing the topic generally and then talking about the different things that you're going to talk about in your essay in terms of your analysis. You need a nice brief description, 2 paragraphs at the most, focusing on what the policy is talking about, the purpose, and this is where you include your background context, media articles, any political speeches that talk about it, if it came out of event, discussing that. Then you critically analyse your document, and this is the main part of your essay. Read it carefully and go and find research literature which aligns with what you're talking about. So how does the document describe the part of the policing that it's focused on? What are the key assumptions about policing that underpin the policy document? And what are the main strength and the main weakness that the policy approaches that are being used? So there's certain ways that you can do this. For instance, the policy might talk about young people in policing. How does the policy talk about young people? Are they talked about as needing support and early intervention, or are they talked about as a nuisance in the public domain? So that's what I mean by number 1. How does the document describe the part of policing that it's focused on? The key assumptions can be a little bit different and a little bit difficult. So for instance, if we go back to that policy around young people again, they might be assuming that young people are unruly or ill-disciplined. So how does it talk about that in terms of that main assumption? So the assumption is young people are unruly and ill-disciplined. How is policing going to be part of that process to sort of bring them back into line? So that might be an example of an assumption. If you're worried about whether or not you've got the right assumptions, or if you've got assumptions and not just statements, just email me a list of your assumptions and I can have a look at it. In fact, I'm happy to look at a whole dot point list of the different points that you're going to put into this, and I can, check it for you and all of that sort of stuff. Then having a look at your main strength, your main weakness, that's fairly straightforward. Then you've got your conclusion where you're summarising and talking about the so what factor and your list of references. Some very quick tips about this task for you. Make sure you've got a clear intro. Briefly outline the policy clearly and concisely. Don't use the whole essay to talk about it. Ensure you answer the 3 key questions in your analysis and that you're supporting it with research. Clearly identify a key strength and a key weaknesses. Don't just one strength, one weakness. Don't just list off a whole bunch of strengths and weaknesses and not detail them with reference to literature. Use quotes sparingly. It's a good idea to bring in some to demonstrate assumptions, for instance, but your critical analysis comes with being able to talk about it in relation to literature, so that needs to be your focus. Signpost well, make sure you proofread and have good structure, use subheadings and reference properly and consistently. So where students have gone wrong in the past sometimes with this is that people haven't followed the essay structure. They use the entire assignment to describe the content of the policy rather than analysing it in relation to the research literature. Sometimes they don't describe the policy at all and they just, or in general terms, and that can be a big problem too. Sometimes people don't clearly identify a strength or a weakness, or they just list off a whole bunch of strengths and a whole bunch of weaknesses rather than focusing on talking about it in specific detail in relation to the research literature. Absolutely vital, folks. Make sure you do that. Some people don't have subheadings. Some people have poor paragraphing and sentence structure. They have follow-on sentences where they join 2 together with the word however in the middle. Lack of proofreading, unclear paragraphing, and minimising your quotes is really important. So people massively throw in a whole bunch of quotes and don't have enough of their own writing, which is what we're actually assessing. So one more point. Critical does not necessarily mean negative. So for instance, if the policy is around boot camps, right? It's a great example because boot camps are not supported by the research literature at all. So if we have a policy that police are implementing around boot camps and we go to the research literature, it stands to reason research literature is going to say boot camps are a shit idea, please don't do it. So then your analysis will be negative, right? It's negative because there's no research to support the policy. But sometimes the policy is supported in the research evidence, and that will be probably a more positive thing, saying, yeah, they're doing a great job. They've ticked all the boxes. They've actually looked at the research evidence and it clearly supports the policy. So that's what I mean by critical doesn't necessarily mean negative. I hope that helps explain that a little bit more for you. So I've got a whole bunch of common problems in past essays. Not using 1.5 line spacing. Please use that so we can put the comments in. Not following the task structure. Using rhetorical questions. Using personal communication with people about a policy. Not the best idea. Just focus on the research literature to support your ideas. Relying on first-person accounts or personal opinions, definitely not a good idea as well. Focus on the research. Not using full paragraphs, including a series of definitions in the essay instead of incorporating these into the introduction of the essay. That's pretty important to make sure that you're sort of quarantining your ideas there. And not using research literature to analyse your key points. So what does the rubric tell us? It tells us that we need to be looking at a detailed application of specific research literature to analyse the policy. And this is what you have to do if you want to get a high distinction. You need a detailed critical discussion of 3 specific underlying assumptions. So 3. If you want a high distinction, you need to have 3 assumptions in that policy discussed. Critically considering future practice is pretty important, making sure you've got some sort of detailed discussion about that. And then detailing evaluation, detailed evaluation of one specific strength and one specific weakness of the policy is also a good idea. And then we've got stuff around communication, which is addressing the set task, making sure your spelling and your grammar and your paragraphing is good, and attributing the work of others, which is referencing. And you can see there I've got 10 or more references for a high distinction, for instance. A reminder about your essay structure. You should be all over this by now because you've already done another essay, but making sure you've got a good intro, you've got your body, including subsections, and you've got your conclusion. And there's some links on the slides there for you if you want to know more about that. And of course, you've got plenty of information online about it too. So what do your paragraphs look like in this particular task? I focused on a paragraph here that talks about an assumption, so you can see a good example. So the assumption they're talking about here is that all injuries can be prevented. This utopian style thinking is a source of tension due to the belief that many accidents and injuries can never be reduced to 0. So they're elaborating on the idea here. Then they talk about research literature in depth that's related to that specific point. And there's a lot of research here. They've done an excellent job in this particular instance. And then at the end, we've got some linking sentences. Anecdotally, police don't believe that all injuries are preventable. As a result, this assumption is theoretically possible, yet challenging to achieve or sustain. So a nice linking sentence that goes back to the overall point. I've given you an example introduction. Again, it's very good with clear signposting. Firstly, I will unpack. Secondly, I will draw on. Thirdly, I will talk about. Then I will, lastly provide a short reflection. And then we've got a good conclusion here as well, which again, summarising your main points and then talking about so what for future in terms of Victoria Police. But folks, that is it. I hope that was helpful for you. Please don't hesitate to get in touch if you've got any other questions, and I'll chat to you soon. Laters!